Hello and good morning or good afternoon or good evening or good whatever time of night or day it happens to be, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to Republic News. I am your hostess, Liviana. As you probably know, if you are familiar with my videos or my publication, my blog posts, my Twitter, my whatever, as you probably know, I am a member of the Green Party of the United States. This does not mean that I agree with 100% of the platform of the Green Party, nor the platform of any given candidate running for the office on the Green Party ticket. It means that I agree far more with the platform of the Green Party of the United States than I do with any other political party in the United States today. Like every political party, the GPUS has its factions. The late Peter Camejo, one of the leading lights of the Green Party, wrote a piece over 10 years ago called The Crisis in the Green Party, wherein he discussed some of the factionalism. At the time, he was talking about a faction which did not want the GPUS to be a truly independent party, but rather a sort of adjunct to the Democratic Party, and a faction which had rather right-wing economic views. Factions still exist within the GPUS, including a faction which regards the party as some type of auxiliary to the Democratic Party, a faction which opposes socialism, a faction which advocates for Marxism, a faction supporting non-Marxist socialism, a faction advocating modern progressivism, a faction which promotes regressive authoritarianism, a faction which advocates for the goals of the American Monetary Institute, a faction which understands and seeks to promote modern monetary theory, and perhaps other factions as well. Some of these factions overlap, some cooperate with others. At one time, even a faction which thought that Greens should be a movement instead of a political party struggled against those who wanted to form a political party, and a schism occurred, with the one group forming the Green Party of the United States, a political party, and the other group becoming the movement known as the Greens Green Party of the USA. I would like to have a look at certain portions of the bylaws of a certain state's Green Party chapter, noting that an almost identical statement is now being promoted for another state's Green Party chapter, and after reading this statement, I will be discussing it. So, I will quote, and I'm going to omit the name of the state. Quote, 2.4, in keeping with the Green Party's third pillar of social justice, the Green Party of State X declares itself to be an anti-oppression party actively dedicated to the work of ending capitalism and dismantling white supremacy and heteropatriarchy. As such, expressions of sexism, racism, classism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and other oppressive behaviors are not in keeping with the values of the Green Party of Redacted. 2.41. Further, the Green Party of Redacted explicitly rejects the false ideas of reverse racism, misandry, etc., because we understand the role of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, etc., in the oppression of our comrades of all colors, genders, and sexual orientations. While it is possible for prejudice against white people, against men, against cisgender people, against straight people, or other privileged group, any other privileged group to exist, this prejudice is not oppression because there are no institutional power structures designed to disenfranchise these privileged groups. 2.42. State officers will conduct themselves in public statements, public appearances, and other situations acting in the capacity as representatives of the Green Party of Redacted in a manner in keeping with the aforementioned values of anti-oppression. Representatives of the Green Party of Redacted shall make every effort to respect and amplify the voices of marginalized people. 2.43 Informed and inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King's words in his letter from a Birmingham jail in which he decries the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, end quote. State officers are charged with the responsibility of wading through the difficult discussions when oppression arises, or to ask for help from outside allied organizations if they do not possess the skills. 2.44 Leadership of local chapters should also adhere to these values, and they should do everything within their capacity to help develop the consciousness of their membership so as to create a welcoming, safe space in which to build collective power with women, people of color, people with disabilities, and the entire spectrum of the LGBTQIA+ community and the homeless. 2.45 As a corollary to oppression under capitalism is the oppression felt by the white working class members of our community, who are often used as bludgeons by the ruling class against women, people of color, people with disabilities, etc. It is the mission of the Green Party of Redacted to create opportunities for solidarity so that mutual understanding and shared collective power can be built. 2.46 The Green Party recognizes this nation's actual history, not its idealized history, a history of empire building, capitalism, white supremacy, and genocide. The Green Party must lead in the understanding of this history and the current reality that this is history's result. End quote. Late one night recently, couple of nights ago, I guess now, I published an article on the Progressive Flame, an article called "What the Heck is Progressivism?" and I spammed the link out to various places on the internet. When I wrote this article, one of the things that I had in mind was this particular statement. Now, in this statement is included some admonitions for representatives, official representatives of the state party and local parties and so forth, local party chapters and so forth. So I would like to point out that the job of a representative in a leadership position of the Green Party of the United States or a state or local chapter thereof should be, among other things, to promote solidarity and oppose division. The Green Party has had rather poor results in national elections. In the general election of 2016, for example, Green Party candidate for president Dr. Jill Stein received slightly more than 1% of the national popular vote. 1.06% to be precise. We are the 99%. We are all oppressed. The same structures enable and facilitate oppression of the white cisgender heterosexual male and the black transsexual lesbian female. Do minorities face discrimination on the basis of largely superficial and immutable characteristics to which a white cisgender heterosexual male is not subjected? Sure, of course. And this discrimination must be dealt with. But as I have said before many times, it will never be dealt with in more than a temporary and token manner until the structures which enable and facilitate oppression of white cisgender heterosexual males and everyone else in the 99% are either reformed or dismantled. By By the year 2016, political messaging focusing on identity politics, outrage mongering, and victim playing, coupled with the most heinous accusations so common among, if indeed not defining characteristics of, regressive outrage mongers, had already alienated a sufficient number of people who might otherwise have voted for Hillary Clinton. This narrative, reflected in the bylaws of the state chapter of the Green Party, which I read, is divisive. Yes, there is no such thing as reverse racism. It's just fucking racism. There's nothing reverse about it. Racism is racism is racism is racism is racism. It doesn't matter who it's directed against. The same is true of sexism, of course. Oh, they say, but white, cisgender, heterosexual males do not face institutional oppression, they say. To this I will respond with a quote. You tell me it's the institution. Well, you better free your mind instead. All this horseshit about institutional racism, institutional sexism, institutional thisism, institutional thatism, ism, is simply a misapprehension of the entire situation, substituting rhetorical fecklessness about institutions in place of the actual means through which oppression is enabled and or facilitated, that being structures largely capitalist in nature. While the portion of the platform in question does refer to institutional power structures, it does so in a manner which exposes a lack of understanding of the intended focus of intersectionality, emphasizing again a focus on identities rather than structures. Greens are not going to win with this message, a message which has already failed the Democrats repeatedly, a message which alienates a large portion of people who are in fact oppressed through the same structures. What we have in these statements in the bylaws of the state chapter of the Green Party amounts to a watering down of the actual meaning of social justice and the transformation thereof into a bully's weapon. They spoke also of let me see what exactly was the phrase they used in this statement. Let's see here. I shall make every effort to respect and amplify the voices of marginalized people. This is a not very veiled, it's probably a rather thinly veiled reference to the so-called progressive stack, which has been characterized as the Oppression Olympics. It's a distortion of the original intention of Kimberly Crenshaw in her idea of intersectionality, so that intersectionality becomes, as a writer for the New York Times said sometime recently, a sort of caste system in which those who have had more historical oppression are considered to be in the highest tiers of these various castes. In the novella Animal Farm, after the animals overthrew the farmers, they painted certain precepts on the wall of the barn, the 7 commandments, so-called. One of the key precepts, perhaps the most important precept, was, all animals are equal. After Napoleon the pig consolidated his power and became the dictator of Animal Farm, he had this precept amended secretly by one of his lackeys, so that it read, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. All the other precepts were also removed. Of course, the idea of being more equal is incoherent. Something or someone either is equal to something or someone else, or it is not, and there is no less or more equal. Equality either is or it is not. I referenced a song by the Beatles a few moments ago, urging the listener to free his or her mind. In 1992, another band, a group of 4 black women called En Vogue, released a song called Free Your Mind. The song begins with a spoken statement followed by the title sung in chorus as follows. Prejudice. Wrote a song about it? Like to hear it? Here it goes. Free your mind. The chorus to the song admonishes the listener, free your mind and the rest will follow. Be colorblind. Don't be so shallow. In 2018, when people speak of being colorblind, particularly if such people be or appear to be white, they are often accused by these regressive outrage mongers of expressing white privilege. And yet, a mere 16 years ago, 4 young black ladies were telling everyone to be colorblind. I was among the first children to attend fully integrated public schools from grade 1 in the United States. I studied with, worked with, and played with people of various pigmentations, assorted ethnic ancestries, sundry national origins, myriad religions, in an international megalopolis. By these means, we all learned that regardless of these superficial differences, there is good and bad in everyone, as yet another song proclaims, a song which also points out the fact that ebony and ivory can live together in perfect harmony, side by side on a piano keyboard, and asks, why can't we? This song was, of course, performed by 2 legends of music, Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder. Another older song, one by the band Three Dog Night, told us, the ink is black, the page is white, together we learn to read and write. A child is black, a child is white, a whole world looks upon the sight, a beautiful sight. But let us again turn to Dr. King. The bylaws in question quoted his statement about the white moderate. It seems to have been included primarily as a dig at whites rather than a condemnation of moderates, and I do not believe this was Dr. King's intention. Indeed, in his most famous speech delivered on the 28th of August, 1963, he proclaimed, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. If all animals be equal, then none is more equal than others, and none is less equal either. So which is it? Do we embrace the privilege of Politburo members under Stalin, or do we embrace the Enlightenment ideals of liberty, fraternity, and equality? Do we debase ourselves by simply turning oppression upside down, making the oppressors into the oppressed and the oppressed into the oppressors? Or do we elevate ourselves and all others through the Masonic ideal of the brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity? When we get to meet the new boss, will it be the same as the old boss? Are some animals more equal than others? Or are all animals equal? Our answers to these questions are vital. Eleanor Roosevelt said, quote, pit race against race, religion against religion, prejudice against prejudice. Divide and conquer. We must not let that happen here. End quote. In Book 6 of his book Of the Art of War, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote, quote, a captain must, among all of the other of his actions, with every art of ingenuity, to divide the forces of the enemy, or to make him suspect his men in whom he trusts, or to give him reason that he has to separate his people, and through this to become most weak. Machiavelli attributes this strategy to the Greeks and Romans, referencing a number of Romans as having practiced it, and even Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general. The strategy has been expressed variously in Latin as divide et impera, divide and conquer, divide et vinces, divide and you will win, divide ut imperis, divide in order that you may conquer, and divide ut regnes, divide in order that you may rule, and was embraced not only by Roman imperialists like Gaius Julius Caesar, but also by Napoleon Bonaparte and others more recently. The original statement of the strategy is attributed by tradition to Philip of Macedon in the Greek expression diairai kai basilue, divide and rule. However, this strategy was not unknown to the Chinese either. Sun Tzu, also called Sun Tzu, who died almost 100 years before Philip of Macedon was born, wrote the following in Chapter 6 of The Art of War, quote, "By discovering the enemy's dispositions and remaining invisible ourselves, we can keep our forces concentrated while the enemy's must be divided. We can form a single united body while the enemy must split up into fractions. Hence there will be a whole pitted against separate parts of a whole, which means that we shall be many to the enemy's few." End quote. A few hundred years later, during the early years of the Three Kingdoms era in China, the text known as the 36 Strategies listed as Strategy 10, Xiaoli Kang Dou, knife sheathed in a smile. Charm and ingratiate yourself to your enemy. When you have gained his trust, you move against him in secret. One of the most effective strategies and tactics used by the FBI's COINTELPRO was to one of the most effective tactics used by the FBI's COINTELPRO to disrupt the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the hippie movement of the 1960s and 70s, and others, was to infiltrate and then divide groups of these movements by sowing distrust and suspicion, by spreading false rumors about respected members of the groups, by encouraging rivalries over petty shit. The Occupy movement is widely regarded as having begun on the 17th of September 2011 with the Occupy Wall Street protest in Zuccotti Park in New York City. By February of 2012, the last remaining high-profile camps had been evicted. The FBI was already monitoring and targeting what became the Occupy movement as early as August of 2011, a month prior to the Occupy Wall Street protest. Internal FBI documents obtained by the Partnership for Public Justice Fund, or PCJF, through Freedom of Information requests, show that the FBI used police informants and infiltrators to systematically monitor the activities of anti-Wall Street groups and share information about them with other federal, state, and local police agencies, as well as with private corporations. The response to the protests was coordinated through the Domestic Security Alliance Council, or DSAC, described by the federal government as, quote, a strategic partnership between the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the private sector, end quote. From the beginning, the slogan of the Occupy movement was, "We are the 99%, an expression of solidarity." By the time the last high-profile camps were cleared, the movement had broken up into rival groups differentiated from one another by superficial differences, squabbling with one another over scraps from the table of the 1%. It is difficult to conceive of this division arising from the grassroots, but an AstroTurf operation conducted by infiltrators to divide the movement would be in keeping with the history of counterintelligence projects conducted by the USIC. This was not an example of divide et impera, divide and conquer. The establishment does not need to conquer, it is already in power. However, to maintain its oligarchic dominance over the 99%, divide ut regnes, divide in order that you may rule, would be an effective strategy. This strategy has a fertile garden in which to sow the seeds of division, namely the regressive outrage mongers who have distorted the ideals of social justice, intersectionality, and various expressions of activism into a focus on superficial differences. In the novel Spock Must Die, the author James Blish has Mr. Spock say, quote, a difference which makes no difference is no difference, end quote. The source of this has been attributed to American philosopher, psychologist, and physician William James as quote, a difference which makes no difference is no difference at all, end quote. I have not been able to trace this quote to a source in James's work, but a similar statement is found in William James's 1907 work, What Pragmatism Means, where he wrote, quote, "There can be no difference anywhere that doesn't make a difference elsewhere. No difference in abstract truth that doesn't express itself in a difference in concrete fact and in conduct consequent upon that fact, imposed on somebody, somehow, somewhere, and somewhen." End quote. The paraphrase, if it be a paraphrase put into the mouth of Spock, suffices to call attention to a truth of which we should take note. Claims of privilege, claims that prejudice against privileged groups is, quote, "not oppression because there are no institutional power structures designed to disenfranchise these privileged groups," end quote, rely on circular reasoning and ignore the concrete fact that the structures which enable and facilitate oppression do not care what might be someone's pigmentation, ethnic ancestry, national origin, chromosomal sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or religion. They oppress all but those who wield them, and white cisgender heterosexual males are not exempt from this oppression simply because they share some superficial characteristics with the 1% who use these structures to fleece the 99% and keep the 99% marginalized. We need solidarity. Division is the opposite of solidarity. I don't know how many more ways I can say this other than to make it as plain as I have. It should be obvious. I may be accused of speaking from a place of privilege or of having internalized misogyny or some other bullshit. Such accusations were built into the very definition of political correctness by those who had already co-opted it by the year 2003 as an attempt to immunize themselves from any and all criticism. I have nothing to prove to anyone. I am obviously a woman, and those who know me reasonably well know that I am of mixed ethnicity and that I am bisexual, but other specifics are known only to very close friends and family, because I do not wear my supposed identities on my sleeve, nor do I put them upon my shoulder as a chip to tempt someone to knock them off and thereby give me an excuse to claim that I was provoked or harassed or oppressed. I have no shame over my so-called identities, but I do not regard them as defining me, nor as avenues by which someone else should relate to me. I am myself. That's my identity. You deal with me as an individual unless I direct you otherwise in a specific context. Am I unique? Sure. Just like everybody else is unique, which means that being unique isn't particularly special. Alienating others who are oppressed, denying that they are oppressed, accusing them of privilege, these are not tactics by which the 99% will ever reform or dismantle the structures which have enabled and facilitated oppression. These are tactics which will simply allow those structures to continue and the oppression which is possible through them to continue as well. Only solidarity will be able to produce the reform or dismantling of these structures and the decrease in oppression which we seek. The great civil rights activist and labor organizer Cesar Chavez said, quote, "The people united will never be defeated," end quote. Wise words which we should heed. Wise words indeed. If you have enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of all new content. If you'd like to support my work here on my YouTube channel and at the Progressive Flame, please consider becoming my patron through Patreon. You'll find the link to my Patreon in the video description. Until next time, have fun, but stay safe. For Republic News, this is Liviana, signing off.